Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. Thank you for letting me take a week off last week. We are back at it now. This is a long episode, so I don't really want to delay here too much at the very beginning. So let's get into talking about all of the albums, all of the released albums of Into the Woods, starting now. Chris Brown, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Hi, thank you so much, Kyle.
You know, this is the first time you're here, and I guess just to reference what your social media account, you're not that Chris Brown. I just want to make that very clear here at the very beginning.
Yes, growing up with a name that is related to many other people in the spotlight, it's difficult sometimes to distinguish myself. So a bunch of my social media handles end up being not Chris Brown, just because of that. You'd be surprised how many iterations of Chris Brown's name have already been taken.
I guess that is something that I have never had to deal with so much because there's so very few other Kyle Marshalls in the world. There are a couple. One was a university football player that I got tagged a couple of times with. But I guess something, we don't know the struggle, I guess, of people who have names that become famous later on. They weren't necessarily famous when they were born, but they become famous later on.
Right, because the singer Chris Brown, there's a football player or two as well, but he's just a few years older than me. So it's whenever he was rising to popularity, people ask, if my family named me after him. And I said, well, he was just a baby. It's a good icebreaker for some conversations. It makes my name easy to remember. But then I've also gotten multiple messages online about right. My actions towards others. And I have to say that's not me. I think you're trying to reach a different audience here.
I should also point out the other Kyle Marshall I get confused with is the creator of an animated show called The Loud House, which I have not seen a single second of. But the number of people who reach out to me asking how to break into the animation industry, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know because I haven't done that before. Because this is your first time here, there's a few questions I like to ask first-time guests to kind of get a feel for your history with musical theater and with Sondheim. So let's start as broad as possible. What was your first interest into musical theater? Why the love of that genre?
I mean, I've been in music my entire life. I'm a choir and band kid all throughout everything. My first role was as Santa Claus in a kindergarten production. And since then, I've just always been involved with it. I now teach high school choir. And so it's just been a part of my professional life, a part of my personal life. And it's hard not to love.
I don't even know how to phrase this question. I'm just curious about like the kids that are interested in choir coming in for singing. What are the common reasons for them wanting to join that? Is it musical theater that they're primarily, or do they want to be like pop singers, that sort of thing? Like, what are their influences?
I mean, sometimes there's a very wide range of reasons. Since I'm at the high school level, they're coming to us from our feeders, middle schools. They're coming to us from the programs already. And some of them do want to be the next pop star. Some of them want to use it with theater. Some of them want to be there for the community and the friendships and the just like kind of the group belonging that brings. And then some of them just want to get their fine arts credit. So it's wide, sure. Kind of a hodgepodge of who's here and why.
What was your first introduction to Stephen Sondheim?
I mean, I guess technically my first introduction would have been at West Side Story. However, it wasn't for a very long time that I realized that it was Stephen Sondheim.
This happens a lot, I think, for so many people where they come back to them like, oh, he did the lyrics to this.
Yeah, I was probably in high school, my marching band did a halftime show for West Side Story. And that was when I really realized, oh, okay. Because at that point, I'd been introduced to Sondheim before. But the first time I knew it was Sondheim was probably late middle school, early junior high. And there was a sub day in one of my music classes. And that meant Into the Woods was going to be on the TV. And so my first full introduction was the original Broadway cast Pro Shot. With that came introduction to The Wolf very early as well as a junior high kid and everyone giggling in the room.
It was a different time.
It's
You
a
know, you
different
were able to
time.
show wolf penis in middle school back then.
And I had some of my own students that, well, I guess we'll talk about this, but since I just finished a production being the baker, and I had some of my current students that were going to come see the show say, is the wolf going to look like the other wolf that we've seen? And I had to make clear that although there are similarities, there was one big difference.
This wolf wears pants.
This wolf does wear pants.
I think an appropriate question for the kids to ask you before they come and support you. Well, this is a good time, I guess, to like jump into this because you have had now experience performing in Into the Woods. As a performer inside the show, was there something that was unlocked for you? Was there something you discovered through the rehearsal process? That's like, even though you were familiar with it, it was like, oh, you know, this is something new, or I hadn't thought about this before.
There's something different when actually having the script in hand and actually getting all of the lines and seeing some of the notes and like just as even like stage directions and things to hear a difference from being the outside observer to being the one putting on the show. For me, it wasn't until we were deep into rehearsals and we were at the kind of the fight scene between me and my wife. I'm telling her, no, she's got to stay here with the baby. What if the giant comes back? And she says, what will only a giant's footstep stop your arguing? And I tell her, stay here with the baby, please. And I leave. And one of the first times we fully did that scene on the stage with, set and blocking and everything, I walked off and I realized that's the last time that's our last communication in this show is this big fight. And so like the next time I was going to do that scene, it hit differently for me because the baker doesn't know it's his last time, but Chris knew it was the last time that I was going to see her alive. It just became so much sadder in that moment of our last conversation is this fight where I storm off. Now, the baker, he knows his wife dies. He doesn't know everything else that happens with the prince. And so kind of being the baker present in the show while also being the omniscient and omnipresent actor was interesting to kind of put both of those together and realize, well, yeah, he knows that his wife has died. And I know that his wife has had the tryst with the prince, but the baker doesn't know that. And so he can't act that way. All that he has is sadness and regret about their last encounter.
Yeah, this is the kind of the trick for actors is you as a person will often know more than what your character actually does. So you can't tip the scales too much.
Right.
Because then it starts to feel unrealistic. It's like, well, you don't know. You as the character don't know that this actually occurred.
Probably the thing that I realized once putting things together in place and order, that I'm rarely off stage as the baker. I was like,
yeah.
oh, everyone else was, they would mention, oh, this is when I go downstairs and I do this and that. And I was like, oh, I don't have the moment for that. The longest break I have in Act One is Cinderella at the Grave and Hello Little Girl back to back. And other than that, I'm just hanging out backstage waiting. And I was like, man, I'm really just running on and off a lot here. And I hadn't realized that, until putting it all together because it had been so segmented.
So to that point, something that I kind of discovered while doing a bit of research at the beginning of this season, because Sondheim writes about it, and there is a video that they make for MTI if you license this show for schools that Sondheim is in. And he mentions this too about the best thing actors can do is figure out what they are doing when they're not on stage. Like, what are their characters doing on the stage? Because it doesn't necessarily get spelled out about like they're leaving to do this and then somehow these two characters cross paths. So you kind of have to have in your mind the route you're taking and coming back and doubling back. Otherwise, it can feel a bit too frenetic where it's just like randomly coming in and out, in and out. You have to internalize a little bit about what your goals and destinations actually are.
Yeah. And even some discrepancies in this script that I had from MTI versus the Broadway production. Like there's the whole 100 steps scene, and they both were going to take 100 steps. That scene happens in this MTI script, but it's between the baker's wife and Little Red only.
Oh, interesting.
Like the baker has already left, but when I come back on and I find Cinderella at her mother's crushed grave, and I've been Jack and 81, 82. I'm counting my steps, but it's it's not clear why, because I was not in that previous scene. Talking through that, I was like to the director, I was like, I'm really sorry. I don't understand why this is happening, because why am I counting when I wasn't present for any of this. And so what I kind of just ended up doing was, well, this is a thing my wife has done before. When we get
Right.
separated, we count. We find our way back to each other, and we didn't, but
Yeah. Spoiler alert for everyone.
yeah,
Things end
spoiler.
badly in this show. Well, the last thing I just wanted to touch on here then, through the years of knowing this score, of engaging with it, of now being a part of it, is there any hot takes, I guess, that you have? Are there like these opinions that you might not share with the rest of people, or anything
Oh,
that you want to bring up in regards to the show that might not be a common opinion?
oh goodness. I think the unsung heroes of the show is the step family.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And just that, sure, they're the kind of comedic relief, but they're also, quasi villains. But I had a hard time anytime that they were on stage, not just trying to enjoy whatever they were doing, because it just seemed like when they're out there, all eyes need to be on them, because
Mhm.
they're the best thing that's happening on the stage at that point.
I like that acknowledgement here, though. I think that is something that we haven't really gone into a whole lot here over this entire season, of like, as little as they get lyrics to sing, they
Mhm.
do have a huge impact within not just the plot of this show, but like the texture of the show as well.
Yeah, they're very enmeshed into very important moments.
Hmm.
And towards the end of our rehearsal process, there was a day that our stepmother was not there, and it was actually stepmother and Rapunzel. And with their absences, it felt like an entirely different show,
Mm.
because Rapunzel doesn't say a whole lot. I mean, she sings and screams a lot, um, but the stepmother and Rapunzel, I was like, oh, there's so many moments where they're the impetus for the next action here, and even having someone read a line or do something, the absence of their energy was really like, they are some of the cogs that I felt make the show move forward, because like I myself as the baker, everything happens to me. I don't really, there's not a lot of, I don't think there's a lot of agency in the baker. Everything is just,
Mm.
thrust upon him, and some of those agents of action or chaos is Rapunzel, is that stepmother. And so realizing these roles that they don't get like top billing, but
Right.
in the middle of it going, oh wow, this is an entirely different feeling without these characters present.
Hey everyone, just kind of breaking into the conversation to tell you about some of the people who help this show continue to go. If you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's greatly appreciated. Putting Together is an independent podcast, so if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon. Remember, you can go to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. But our God That's Good tier is Alex, Barry, Christopher, David, Jack, Luis, Mika, Robert, Stephen, Todd, and Whitty. All right, let's get back to the show. Chris, what are we discussing here this week?
We are going to discuss the 1,800 different album
That's right.
recordings that have come out.
Strap in, everyone. You're about to listen to a 5-hour episode.
It's going to be a marathon here.
So, to that point, yes, we're going to listen to all the recordings that are what I am terming easily accessible. That is, in quotes, basically what that really translates into is like, is it on a streaming service in Canada that I can listen to in some form or fashion? Some of these I own already, so that makes it a little bit easier. I do know that there are other recordings out there. If you go online, you can find CDs and other recordings. But like, as much as I love my audience, I'm not spending hundreds of dollars to get import CDs sent to me. At least not yet. So the ones that we have identified are the original Broadway cast from 1987, the original London cast from 1990, because that's available on YouTube that people can go and listen to, the first Broadway revival from 2002, the film from 2014, this very interesting album that I can't wait to talk about from the London Musical Theatre Orchestra from 2014, and then, of course, the second Broadway revival from 2012, or sorry, not from 2012, from 2022. A bunch of those you have heard throughout this season, snippets from those, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on here today. Before we go and talk about the individual recordings, Chris, something that you brought up before we push record here today that I thought was like something fascinating to kind of delve into, just the recording process itself and how it has changed from, say, like the mid to late 80s to present day, and what we even expect from a musical theater album in our current day. So I don't know if there's anything you want to expand on that.
It was really interesting going through, listening to the original Broadway cast recording, which is what, 87?
Yeah.
And then hearing all the way up to the 22 revival and hearing the same material recorded differently. And I don't mean orchestrations, any of that necessarily, but, what equipment was used? What was the style of the time? To me, like the 87 sounds, although it's not the, different time. So it's not the audio that was pulled from the Pro Shot because those were a couple years apart. But it sounds like I could be listening just to the audio from a stage production. And, you're still hearing everything, but it's not super hot mics and focused in on people. But then as you go through the years and like getting up to the film and the 22 revival, it's just hard not to picture someone in a recording booth with a mic and a filter right in front of them.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess from the little I know, so I guess someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the, recording different parts separately and then mixing them afterwards has been around for decades at this point. Like that's not necessarily like a brand new thing for cast albums. That being said, I think what you're calling out is something that I've noticed, especially from like, I don't know what the time frame would be. I would say from mid 90s and before, there does often feel like this feels like it's on a stage, even if it's not being recorded on a stage. They're really playing with space a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So it feels like some people are closer or further away to give this more, I don't know, spacious type of recording element to it. I've always found the original Broadway cast album of this show, theatrical, cinematic, I don't know how you want to say it really plays like left and right channels a lot.
And it's not that it was like with the newer recordings, it's not that it's wrong, but I just,
it's just different.
Well, and I'd expect that type of recording style to be associated with a modern musical, so I'd expect to hear, Mean Girls, and I would expect it to be mixed this way. Whereas, it'd be the same as if I were to hear Rodgers and Hammerstein that's suddenly in this recording style where it
has some sick trap beats being played in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right to call out how just the sound quality has changed over time. I think also this is something that we've brought up quite a bit, I think, through this season especially. But when albums decide to use book scenes or not use book scenes, like every one of these recordings is slightly different as far as like, we want to include a little bit more of like the intro into this song, or we're going to listen to, a book scene in between verses, or we're not going to listen to that book scene in between verses. I don't think necessarily there's a right or wrong answer to this, but I always return back to the idea that I've become firm in this opinion that cast albums in particular are not a one-to-one of the show. They have to exist almost as like this own unique entity. We're not going to replicate everything that was on stage in an audio-only format. And yet, we should be giving, if this is your first introduction to it, which it often is for most people who listen to cast albums, they have not seen the Broadway show and are now buying the album. It's them buying it first and maybe eventually seeing the Broadway show later, but giving them enough information to be like, oh, I can piece this together. I understand what the story is without having to listen to every single book scene that's available as well.
Listening to different recordings, there's sometimes a more presence of some post effect.
Sure.
Altering.
Mm-hmm. A little bit auto-tune touch-ups sometimes here and there.
A little bit of that was a little yip there, which for me, I understand it. It just takes me out of it because it reminds me, again, I'm not listening to the show. I'm listening to, a canned studio.
I mean, you mentioned like you weren't necessarily talking about orchestrations, but I do want to bring that up slightly here,
Hmm.
which is that I've always found it so fascinating where like this actually really happened a lot with the second Broadway revival. So the one from 2022. So for
Okay.
whatever reason, there was moments that happen in there where they either like bring an instrument a little bit more up in the foreground or something like that. I'm like, wait, has that always been there? And then going back to the original Broadway, like, oh, it is there. I just have never noticed it because it's up in the background
Right.
somehow. And
And
this,
some of that, it's like, are some of these choices, is this an MD choice, or is this whoever
yeah,
was mixing? Like, was there communication, or is it just, well, this is how I set up my sound?
right. Yeah, yeah. This is all to say, I can totally understand why some people will have like, no, this is the best recording of, this song. It's like, no, 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 this is the perfect recording of this song. It's all going to be different. I guess the last thing I'll just mention before we get into each of these individual recordings is, of course, like the different performances that we have. And I will be the first to admit that my biggest bias is like, whatever album I listen to first always does form the template for me. Like, well, this is how it should kind of sound. Like, this is what
Sure.
it's supposed to sound like. I try so hard to like break myself out of that mentality sometimes. I always find it so interesting how different performers take on the same exact role. It's like, oh, okay, you decided to really accentuate that one word in this lyric. That was your
Hmm.
acting choice for this one. Or like you decided to go down in your register instead of up in the register, maybe because you couldn't hit the note. I don't know. But like, again, it's just a different choice that you've
Right.
decided
And
to
some of
do.
that's like, you want to ask them, was that your decision to drop it, or was that
Right.
someone else's, or what, did we change keys here because of you, or was that, but when you're speaking about your first album, and I think with that comes not just is it your first exposure to it, but more than likely it's your first exposure, and then it'll be a while before your second. So that's the
Yeah,
one you get, you listen to it over and over. And then that is ingrained because no matter which one it is first, you're probably not jumping to another recording so quickly. You're getting
that's right.
used to one. You're living in that one.
So that's usually what it means when there is a revival out there. It takes me a few listens to like, okay, I'm now finally getting into like the groove of what they were trying to do here. I do want to talk about Sondheim's involvement through some of these recordings, but like let's jump into the original Broadway cast here. So as I said, this is the show comes out in 1987. I actually think the recording comes out in 88.
Okay.
If my sources are correct here. But regardless, it's coming out here in the late 80s. I remember my CD version of this because I got this, 10 years after it would have originally come out. And it came on like a double
Uh-huh.
CD, like the
Yep.
big, huge clamshell thing. Huge booklet that was inside of it that had, I think it did have lyrics in it if I remember correctly, but it had a whole bunch of stuff included inside of it. And anything we want to say, I guess, broadly about this recording?
I mean, to me, this is my recording to me,
Mm-hmm.
but it was my first.
It just sounds right sometimes.
Yeah. And like this one, and then from listening to the London one, but this to me is almost, there's so much that's cut, the book scenes are cut, and obviously, but this is almost like, listening to like a radio production of or something where I can
Yeah.
I can really put myself in it.
Basically, you have to remember too that this was going to be constrained with what hardware was available at the time. They had to be able to fit this onto, a couple of tapes or a couple of CDs. You're not going to get anything past that. That honestly really is my only like slight nitpick out of a 10 out of 10 album for me. My slight nitpick is like, I do actually wish that there was a couple of additional, I'm not even talking about long, like just a couple additional lines sometimes to set up scenes and stuff like that.
Mm.
I am a defender though of the cut songs that are included on this album, meaning like the extension of A Very Nice Prince that was not even in the original Broadway cast version, but there's an extra verse that gets included on the Broadway
Mhm.
recording. Oh shoot, I just blanked on it. There's another song that they give an additional verse that actually does not exist, but it's included. And I always think it should be there on all of the
Mm.
revivals, and it never is. It's like, oh right, that's right, they cut that out. But yeah, as a full recording of this, again, I have the rose tinted glasses on where I listen to this like over and over and over as a teenager. So like this is kind of ingrained in my head. I know how certain lines are like read by Bernadette Peters or Joanna Gleason.
Uh-huh.
Even the slotted soon can catch the potato. Like that is like literally in my head 24/7 playing for me. It is one of those like iconic musical theater albums for me.
Yeah. And it was hard to divorce myself from whenever I was going to do this to not just, oh, this is what I know. And I need to Not necessarily deviate, but I can't copy paste this.
That's right. This would have been absolutely at a time where Sondheim would have been very involved with the recording of this album. We know from the documentary of the recording of the company cast album how much he would, encourage performers and like ask them to do different takes and stuff like that. I'm assuming the same thing is true for this album. I don't have any visual evidence of that fact, but I would assume it's the same.
I would imagine. I mean, and Bernadette is in this, and there's a reason that she is in it, and I don't see him being, straying from the path if she's there.
I think that's the other thing. Again, as far as performances go, I've said there has been which performances that I very much adore. I've said this: the Heather Waddingham performance of the witch in that Hyde Park. No, Regent Park. It's Regent Park in London. I think she does a phenomenal job. She might even be my favorite interpretation of that. But there's so much pain in Bernadette's voice inside of this recording that it just feels like, okay, we are going through something, or this witch character is definitely going through something.
And she starts out as the clear villain, the clear, and then kind of against our will, we are made to not excuse her actions, but understand more of her. And really that she's a sad, lonely person who's been betrayed by her mother, and I just think she does that so well that, again, not as an excuse for her actions, but as a reasoning for how she has turned out the way she has. And I love a broken person. And so it's hard not to want to go there and fix that. And she just brings out the compassion for her in this role.
It just seems like each performer has to make this decision about whether or not, do I want this witch to be terrifying to the audience or goofy to the audience? Like that seems to be kind of like the pivot point. Again, I'm not here to say that one way is right or wrong necessarily, but I guess I like my witches a little bit terrifying and then have that sympathy. Like that's kind of like the little magic trick of this show is like, oh your gosh, like this is the villain. Like, oh wait a second, maybe she has some good points here.
And I'll throw this in since you mentioned it, maybe for another point. Yeah. But if you happen to have any recordings of these other albums that you would like to send,
sure,
in Kyle's way, then that would be great too.
Yes, it was lovely. For you then, what are your standout moments? What is the song or songs that are like, let me phrase this a different way. Let's say that we were creating like a best of Into the Woods playlist for people. And we did have to include songs from different recordings. What's the song or songs that you're picking from this recording?
I'm definitely going to include Hello Little Girl on this one. It just, without saying it tells you exactly what you need to know about this song. It conveys it so well. It's ooky, it's spooky, it's cautionary. And then Agony is a must. As far as this recording goes, they play together so well. We hear their Happy Taylor Swift Day, but they're tortured poets coming out of them. We hear this pain, whether it's deserved or not.
By the way, just as a very quick aside, one of my favorite memes that I just stumbled across here yesterday was a picture of Sondheim like with his head in his hands and then with Tortured Poet Society underneath it. So he was our Taylor Swift at one point.
Yes. Well, I'll need that then, because that's and I think because of the tenderness of it, Stay With Me, if we're going to talk about Bernadette, I mean, it starts out so angry and intense.
Yes.
Ends just so gentle and so tender.
Don't you know what's out there in the world? Someone has to shield you from the world. Stay with me.
Stay With Me is on mine as well. I would definitely pick it from this one. I'm going to go for it and to say I like the prologue the best from this as well. Like talk about like nailing that 12-minute long number of different people coming and going and like it all coming together at the end so well. And then for me, it's my standout song. It was like my number one song for this entire year when we were keeping track of my favorite songs from this show. But Moments in the Woods. I love Moments in the Woods, the way that Joanna Gleason performs it.
Was it wrong? Am I mad? Is that all? Does he miss me? Was he suddenly getting bored with me? Wake up, stop dreaming, stop prancing about the woods. It's not beseeming. What is it about the woods? Back to life. Back
Yeah,
to
I mean,
sense, back to
we
childhood,
talked about this album being the blueprint or the template, but if anybody's the anything, I think Joanna is the ultimate template for what, even if people changed or improved or, it's clear that she is the best starting point that we could have had for this.
Yeah. To kind of continue on our journey here, we get to the original London cast. Now, this was your first time listening to this, correct?
This was my first exposure to this because I was familiar with the Hannah Waddingham, the Regent Parkwood. Yeah. And whenever you said London, I said, okay, well, I don't think there's that one. And then you mentioned it where I could find it. And yeah, I didn't realize, because I think this was, the recording was 1990.
Yeah, this is one of those weird things. The production happened in 1990. So yeah, this would have come out in 1990, 91. I don't know when the actual album itself would have been released. If people know what I'm talking about here or need a refresher, it has kind of like a tan background with a wolf's face as the artwork on this. I have discovered huge fans of this original London cast. There's some people who will make the argument that they prefer this over the original Broadway cast recording overall. But as a first time listen through, what did you think?
Honestly, at first it was, hearing anything from London, it was so jarring at first to hear everything British. But as I listened to it, I was like, no, I mean, this really, not that the American version is bad, as far as its accent goes and everything, but the British, it tends to take me towards Fairy Tale Land a bit easier. And I felt like throughout listening to this, and probably just because of the timeline, the proximity to it, like that this is clearly the sister of the Broadway version. It's we saw what happened here, and not that they didn't change anything, but if you compared this to one of the even the 2002 revival, there's a lot that's different. And it was like, let's take the Broadway show and bring it overseas
and replicate here. Yeah.
And replicate. Like we know that this is successful. So when listening to it, it was more about individual roles rather than lyrics changes or orchestration or anything, because for the most part, it just was.
Yeah. It's basically the same. The biggest change we should call out is the additional song that gets put onto this album called Our Little World, which I did a whole episode on here in the past season. Interestingly enough, I noticed this on YouTube because that's how I listened to this. Our Little World is like far and away the most listened to and watched of that YouTube playlist. Like there's not even a second one that comes close to it. I think the closest that comes to it is Giants in the Sky from this production has like 22,000 views / listens. And Our Little World has 112,000. Wow. Like I'm talking like not even close. So it seems to be like that is the song people come to if they're going to listen to something from this show.
I can understand that. It's one of those, it's something new to hold on to, because if it's not in the original Broadway, and you got to get it, you got to get your fix somewhere.
That's right. Now, talking about the actual recording itself, this one I would say also plays around a little bit with like space and stuff like that. But to be fair, I will just say this, I am going slightly deaf in my left ear, so maybe it's a channel thing that I'm not picking up. But the narrator I found like super hard to hear in most of him talking about. He seemed way too far away. It's like he was being drowned out by certain things. And I had no problems with the rest of the cast. I don't know what it was, but the narrator specifically, where it's like, I can't really hear what he's saying sometimes. But maybe that's just a me thing.
Well, and see, I mostly listen to it through through not earbud or anything. So no comment.
No comment. But you're deaf, Kyle. That's what's going on.
Yeah, but it seems like a personal problem.
But yeah, for the most part, like I guess that's the thing for me, because I know the original Broadway cast so well. Like outside of the inclusion of that Our Little World song, this does feel very much to me like, yep, that is a copy of the original Broadway cast. It's like it's not bad.
Yeah, but I don't want that to be in an insulting way.
Yeah,
you did exactly what you should have done. I mean, I thought Imelda was great in this on A Very Nice Prince. I said I loved her earnestness with it, because she was just like, I feel like a lot of times, even Joanna, her and is kind of more and like kind of trying to draw a and.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess she's more eager. Like she wants to.
Yeah, she was like, and come on, spit it out. Like I'm trying to get something out of you. And she gets frustrated with it. And I liked that sort of a more like frantic, heated energy that she brought to that song and some other places, but like really, really hearing it there. And Imelda on Moments in the Woods, like I thought she had a really nice balance and blend of heavy and light and hard and tender. And
yeah, she does such a great job. She has really become, interestingly enough, one of the best interpreters of Sondheim, in my opinion. Like, she's been in this, right? She's been in a version of Sweeney Todd. She's been in Gypsy. She's been in Follies. Like, she's done so much of the Sondheim canon at this point. I don't even know what other big role there really is for her to play now at like her age. I don't think there's much, unless she wants to come back and do one of the older performances from Follies, or she could be the witch. Yeah. You know? So get on that, Hollywood, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm sure she played a lovely Jack's mother.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess before we wrap this conversation up, I actually have no idea how much Sondheim would have been involved with like the London recording of stuff. I'm sure he would have sent in notes or something like that if they asked him about it, but I don't know how like hands-on he would have actually been with the recording process.
Well, and right, because at this point, okay,
he's writing Assassins at this point.
Right, yeah. So it's like, you know, for Broadway, it makes sense because that's what he was doing. But now that that's done and he's moved on to something else.
So we're making this playlist. What songs are you picking from this recording?
I'm picking It Takes Two. I thought,
yeah, it's a good one.
And like super playful, and just like you could tell that they were having fun with it while they were doing it.
We've changed, we're strangers. I'm meeting you in the woods. Who minds what's dangerous? I know we'll get past the woods. And once we're past, let's hope that changes last beyond woods.
Who's the baker in this production? I'm totally blanking.
Okay, well, I think it's Clive Rowe. But what's interesting is in my research for this, I'd had ChatGPT try to make a cast list for me of different shows and everything, and it didn't include some of the versions that I wanted to. And I said, hey, make sure to include the 2022 in this. And so it's sure thing. And its revival cast had Cinderella. Let's see. Sarah Bareilles is not in this revival cast, according to ChatGPT.
Right.
but here's all the names that are: Jesse Mueller, Jonathan Groff, Cynthia Erivo, Annalee Ashford, Beanie Feldstein, Brian Stokes-Mitchell, Hugh Jackman, Norm Lewis.
Sounds like a great cast.
Andrew McDonald. And then, because it had filled out all the characters all the way down to Sleeping Beauty, because I had asked it to. Right. And it put Renee Goldsberry as Snow White, and it put Vanessa Williams as Sleeping Beauty. And I said, you know, I mean, I didn't get the chance to see it myself, so I can't comment. But
I'm pretty sure you're wrong, though.
I'm pretty sure you're wrong here. But you know, just a cautionary tale about AI and
don't believe everything it tells you. Is what it really comes down to. On Wikipedia, it says that the baker was played by Ian Bartholomew. As a quick aside, I just want to say, the one version that I wish that I was an audio recording of, I think there's some bootlegs that you can find online, but I wish there was a professional recording of, was the Central Park version from 2012, which multiple people have told me actually was not a great production of the show, but you have like Amy Adams as the baker's wife, Donna Murphy is the witch. That is where Jesse Mueller is Cinderella. Gideon Glick is Jack. So I mean, there's just some heavy hitters there that I would love to have heard their versions of.
Oh, and talk about, I mean, I want to see Amy Adams in anything.
Me too. Amy Adams is an actress who I have adored for many years and who I truly believe should fire her agent, because the last at least 5 to 6 years have been like, I don't get what's happening.
Oh, like
you are way better than this material that you have picked to be in.
Yeah, or just not being picked for material.
It's like she's become like the second or third pick of everyone in Hollywood. It's like, wait, how is she not in this?
Like, what did she do to, I don't know. Amy, if you're listening, we'd love to see you more.
I love her singing voice too, so I wish she would sing more.
Yeah, she's wonderful in, I just blanked for a second.
Enchanted is the big one.
Thank you. Yeah. She's wonderful in that.
I'm going to pull like the easy card here and just say that Our Little World is I'm going to pick from this. But I also, of the ones that you haven't said, I actually really love how they do the Ever After So Happy inside of this production too. I just think it's so well put together. Sounds similar to the original Broadway cast, but there's a little extra spice for some reason for me in those two back to back. right, well, this brings us to our first Broadway revival. This is in 2002. This is that one with the green background and the trees. You see the little red walking in between them sort of thing. Bit of an iconic cover. Vanessa Williams as the witch. What do you think about this recording?
I had a lot of things about this recording that I would say it's so different than any of the previous two recordings.
Yeah, this is the one where they start to take some liberties. There are some lyric changes that happen.
There's many lyric
songs
changes.
Get remixed a little bit here. But to become a broken record on this, I've said this now multiple times this season, this production in particular does a bunch of changes, and every change I think is for the worse. Every single one.
I'm so glad that you've said something first, and then I can now hide behind that. Yeah, I just... there are moments in this I liked. Like, I love this Cinderella.
Laura Benanti is phenomenal, yes. Yeah. I will never say anything bad about her performance in this.
Yes, and like, she was the breath of fresh air on this album for me. One of my comments overall about this album was I thought that everything was so fast.
Yeah, I think it's speeding up,
It just seems like they had to shave off 20 minutes, and so they were just upping the clicks on each song
just
to get
rushing through,
Yeah. One of the, like, just some of the weird things that I thought was, like, in Giants in the Sky, there's just a weird cut. Like, right towards the beginning, they just like skip over, and it's not a scene. It just cuts to a different part of the song quickly.
In Hello Little Girl, there's the two wolves now, so like it becomes like a duet, that sort of thing.
And which after having like the MTI everything, it's like, oh, which version of these songs are you doing? And they decided to do all of the, like, well, I say decided. Those versions were all made for this cast, I assume.
Yeah, that's what I assume too. Like this, James Lapine came back to direct this again, decided to do some different changes here and there. Sondheim got involved. So like this was definitely coming from the original creators. We're trying something different here. I
like the idea of introducing, like in Hello Little Girl. I love the idea of attaching another fairy tale to this with the wolf,
the little
pigs. And I think if that would have been my first exposure to it, I would have loved it. There's another wolf, and there's some other some other poor victim of another wolf.
What happens is like, it just doesn't really get fully explored. It's just like, you need to know that this is another thing that's happening. You need to know this fairy tale a little bit without us actually having to do any work as far as like characterization and stuff like that. I honestly think the biggest thing, again, it is sung beautifully. There's nothing wrong with how the performers perform it, and it's what was asked of them. But I think you totally undercut Cinderella's, moment.
Oh, and on the
steps of the palace, you do like in the land of the giants and like in the belly of the wolf. I'm like, no, like you don't need it. You don't need to like do this.
Yeah, it seemed to me when I was listening to it, it just seemed like someone else wanted to make a video of their own, like a YouTube video, and they had brought their friends in and they said, oh, this is how we can change it and include all, like it seemed really just forced.
I've been really thinking about this actually for like the last few weeks. I honestly think what annoys me so much about, well, that moment in particular, but most of the other changes inside of this is that it feels like to me that the creators think that the audience is too stupid to make those connections themselves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, we have to put like a real fine point on this because you couldn't possibly make the distinction that, Jack and Little Red and Cinderella are all coming to this realization of where their stories are going, or what they learn, what those moments are all kind of interconnected with one another. No, we have to like let them know specifically, see how they're all interconnected. I'm like, but like it's like someone literally like pointing at it. I'm like, see this thing? I'm like, yeah, I saw it.
Well, and having like at least what I assume would be basically the book, and having it in there for that edition at on the steps of the palace, or for Hello Little Girl. For some of these, there's some alternate scenes because like we did Our Little World in our production, and so there's a little bit of some line changes before leading up to it. But
sure.
Hello Little Girl and On the Steps of the Palace, these characters just like appear. Like there's not a moment of Jack is walking by the cat. It's kind of just come out, and it's like the two single spotlights are now shining on them, and it just seems like they're just kind of thrown in.
That being said, this like sounds like uber negative that I'm throwing out here. Mostly I find this recording to be fine, but it's like, I don't know, a C minus from for me. It's like I'm never really probably going to choose to listen to this over some of the other recordings that are available. Are there songs that you would pull out for like an Into the Woods playlist?
Yeah, I actually, I really, it's so hard. There's so many times in this that I love Vanessa Williams' voice,
Yeah, I
and
know
then
what you're
I
talking
feel,
about.
and then it would turn and into like a different kind of sound that took me out of whatever song it was.
Mhm.
Like one of the comments I wrote was sometimes I hear her singing, and then all of a sudden I hear Roseanne Barr
Oh wow.
out.
Okay. I see.
um and it's so because it's so just sudden, and I know that means it's a character choice, and it's a
Yeah.
but like I wish she would have just kept singing the way that she was singing, because when it's there, I love hearing what she's doing.
Mhm. And she can sing. Like she
Yeah,
was a singer before this.
yeah, I
So
mean, yeah, and this is, I don't know if you would say stunt casting, but but I mean, she was someone who is very talented. It's not
yeah.
stunt casting like, I don't know. There's been a lot of stunt casting recently. Anybody in the Chicago role,
Right.
you know,
The last decade of Chicago,
yeah,
that type of sun
yeah.
casting.
It's not like that stunt casting. It's someone who we just need really big name recognition, and she's great already. I did, if there was to pull one, Moments in the Woods.
Hmm.
Because it really shaped it up for me with the wife at the beginning. This is ridiculous. What am I doing here? Whenever she starts to sing that, and she's singing it, and she's singing it Baker's wife. And it's hard to tell if it's just because of a register change or what. But when she goes, "I'm in the wrong story,"
Yeah,
it
yeah.
all of a sudden it sounds, intentional or not, like she's mimicking the tone of Cinderella.
Oh, interesting. Cool. Yeah, yeah.
And that may not have even been a thought for this person, but for me as the listener, it was, this is ridiculous. Baker's wife, Baker's wife, Baker's wife, Baker's wife. And then that one line, partially just because of the placement of the notes, but like that line just screams Cinderella. And I thought the way she did it really, especially only hearing it, made it sound like Cinderella for a second. And I just really enjoyed that. Just like a
Yeah.
tiny little thing.
This is ridiculous. What am I doing here? I'm in the wrong story. Wait just one moment. We can't do this. You have a princess.
Of course you're right. How foolish. Foolishness can happen in the woods. Once again, please.
There's a few songs that Laura Benanti is a part of that I like to come back to. Honestly, the only one that I have as far as like favorited on my iTunes playlist is the finale / Children Will Listen. That's the one that I seemingly keep coming back to from this recording.
For the childless baker with his wife.
Careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the things you do, children will see and learn. Children may not obey, but children will listen. Children will look to you for which way to turn, to learn what to be. Careful before you say, listen to me. Children will listen. Careful the wish.
And I will say, because this is one where they really changed the finale, right?
Yeah.
Where it's more of the slotted spoon, like we have some
that is
spoken
true.
word
They
moment.
they change a bunch of the intro pieces to it, again to its detriment, I think. But but the actual singing quality at the end really does it for me.
And I'll say, although it's different, I really do enjoy that we're expecting it to be the slotted spoon. We're expecting this to be all this, and now that we're at the end and things are different now, I kind of appreciated the literal change of pace of it.
Yeah, right.
To go, we're at an entirely different point in our story now than we were at the end of Act 1. I will say one that would not get onto the playlist is No More.
Yeah, I know. All right, well, I guess that means we get to move on now to the major motion picture of Into the Woods from the year 2014. This is it depends, I guess, on which album you listen to, because there are actually two that were released at the same time, which is just the songs that are sung in the film. And then there is also like the songs plus the score, like the orchestral score that you can listen to as well. So it doesn't really matter which one you listen to, but was there any big takeaways that you had from this?
I mean, I think the first thing you have to say about this album is I personally think it gets more hate than it deserves. However, that being said, whenever I went to go see this movie, I was so excited for everything
Hmm.
And then there were just so many pieces that they just excised out of it that I just didn't understand why they did.
Especially in the Act 2 stuff. Like, that is the stuff that kind of annoys me the most. Like, I kind of understand shrinking things or removing certain elements from the beginning half. And honestly, one of the changes that I don't actually mind is them cutting out the stepfather role and just like really bringing it down to like the stepsisters and stepmother.
Yeah.
Like, cool change, good change.
Sure.
That character only has like one or two lines anyways in the entire show.
Right.
So like it's an easy change to make. But then it's like when you cut out the mysterious man, it's like, okay, now you're totally changing the...
I can't forgive them for that. You know, it's just because that's one, it's one of the main characters' main storylines.
Yes.
And not only just cutting out No More, which was a crime on its own, and they gave us they play a small instrumental of it as he's like walking through like a tunnel of trees, and I was like, oh, here it is. No, not only that, but just cutting out the whole identity of this character that's so crucial. That
It's
I feel like
yeah, and especially because then you have to cut out not No More. They don't cut out No More. They cut out.
they do cut out No More.
Oh, it is. Okay, yeah, sorry. Remember mixing up. When you cut out No More, it's like, okay, then you've really cut out at the knees, like this person's like major like revelation inside the story. Like that's the whole point that this character is going towards.
You make him an even more helpless character. But I mean, I thought, and I'll admit, like this recording, because of just me being angry about the removal of Mysterious Man and everything, is not one that I've listened to a bunch, but there's some of the incidentals in here that are just brand new instrumentals, correct?
Yeah, and this is all like Jonathan Tunick is very much instrumental in overseeing all of these like orchestral changes and stuff. So some songs just become an orchestral arrangement, and then but there's all the underscoring that happens in certain scenes. I think that stuff kind of is a 10 out of 10. Like, I actually really like listening to just the orchestral versions of a lot of this stuff that's on this record.
I mean, because some of it is just brand new material to begin with, and but it doesn't seem like it's brand new material, which I think is really great overall for this. And I was just talking about with someone with this the other day in prep for this, but I think Anna Kendrick was kind of perfect for this role. Like,
I do too.
Okay, good. It's like
I weirdly enough, I've seen so much hate for Anna Kendrick recently, and I guess I missed the memo that I'm supposed to not like her, but I really much enjoy her performance in this.
Yeah, and a lot of people say that she's, she always plays the same type of person who's just kind of this mousy rebel or whatever. But I could have also seen her being Little Red in this, like her, the way that her, like, she has such a specific tone. I love a good, clear sound, and anything that she does, I know that she's going to bring that to it. And I thought, like, her on the steps of the palace is, although if I remember, there's some changes to it. I think there's some things that are different as far as like we've added in a measure of instrumental,
right.
But like her performance of it is one of my favorites.
Yeah, like that's the song I like, not to jump ahead too far here, but like her version of On the Steps of the Palace would be something I would pull out of this to put onto my mixtape. I like it that much. For whatever reason, for me, I don't like watching the movie. I've done it now multiple times, and each time I just get annoyed by it, by the changes they make. As a listening experience, I think a lot of my frustrations get taken away a little bit because I can just focus on like the performances a little bit more. So it works better for me as just an audio record that I can listen to, because I can kind of just interpret it as being, this is a studio recording of these songs, and a lot of them do it for me. I am also a Meryl Streep fan, so I actually like a lot of her witch stuff that she does inside of this. So yeah, for the most part, I'm kind of a fan of a lot of the performance in this, and you kind of just have to grin and bear James Corden, who isn't a bad singer. I just don't really like him as the baker.
And since you brought him up, I will say, I don't know what dirt he has on Hollywood. I don't know,
Yeah, but what photos did he take that he is able to get this?
But I will say, I think enjoy may be a strong word for me to use in general but I thought I enjoyed him in this because he kind of played the hapless part well. He's kind of just a himbo in it that is just kind of, lost, and Emily Blunt carries him through it. But I will split with you on Meryl, and I think this may be the point, because for me, she like we talked about Bernadette, I just don't get the I don't empathize with her.
Gotcha.
I mean, she plays it really well. I don't get that I'm supposed to see her as anything but controlling and manipulating.
Got you. Yeah, yeah.
Even stay with me when she's like tender in it, to me comes across as just another, it's not genuine from her as I think it should be. It comes across as another gaslighting, attempt to just keep Rapunzel with her rather than her actually being exposed. And
I wish that the second agony, like the agony reprise, was included in this as well, because I actually quite like the two princes, like Billy Magnuson and Chris Pine.
And I'm surprised that they didn't put them in, like, because they had to know that their agony was going to be a hit.
You need some comedy reprieve, I think, in that second act too, just to lighten the mood a bit.
I really loved Emily Blunt in this, though.
Well, I'm a big Emily Blunt fan as well. Like, basically, the only other way that they could have made me over the moon is if they had somehow fit Amy Adams into this as well somehow, and be like, oh, all my favorite women are in this.
I mean, yeah. I mean, because could you imagine Amy as Cinderella?
Yeah.
I mean, that means you would lose Anna, and so not losing anyone, but yeah, no, I thought Emily was in a lot of ways. It seemed like Emily took after Joanna.
There's a bit of hurt there as well. Okay, so I mean, that's the movie version here.
Oh, and there's a lyric change that really just. In the very end of the finale, well, it was at the beginning of the finale. Maybe I just wasn't meant to have children. Don't say that. Of course, you were meant to have children.
Mm-hmm.
The line is, "How can I go about being a father with no one to mother my child?" But James's line is, "How can I go about being a father when I had no father to show me?"
Right. Yeah.
Because I typed it in here and I went, "You're going to bring that up at the end when you've cut out this whole
the emotional centerpiece of the movie."
Like,
yeah, I know.
To me, it was just so weird that it was like, oh, so you do remember that that's a story point. Mm-hmm. You're just shoehorning it in here.
You're choosing not to really do anything with it.
Yeah.
I'll just leave him a clue. For example, a shoe. And then see what he'll do. Now it's he and not you who'll be stuck with a shoe in a stew, in the goo. And I've learned something too, something I never knew. On the steps of the path.
The next album is going to be a weird one to discuss. This is the London Musical Theatre Orchestra from 2014. And full transparency, I only listened to the first half of this album. I thought I was going to have time to finish it off this morning and ended up not being the case. I went to this group's website and I'm getting confused because they say they started in 2016, yet this album came out in 2014. So I don't know if maybe I have the wrong group that's called the exact same thing or what's going on there. Regardless, from what I understand, this is basically just a group who performs musical theater scores in concert. Like, that's just their whole thing. So they don't stage it. It's just like, these are performers and musicians who love musical theater, and we're just performing it in front of mics with an orchestra behind us, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I did listen to the full album.
Yeah.
And I had come across this album before, and I think this entity's existence is, yes, it's everything you said. I think it's also meant to be opportunistic. Because this album came out in what year?
2014, the same as the movie.
And if you go through their catalog, there's I'm not pulling them up off the top of my head, but I think there's a correlation of release dates and
either movie versions or like big Broadway revivals that are coming out. So they're releasing them in tune. Yeah.
In an attempt to, draw traffic towards themselves.
You're saying that they're a tax shelter is what you're trying to say.
Exactly. It's an offshore tax account. Yeah. And I think, what they do, I think is really impressive, actually, because like if I were to look at, the number of albums that they've done is...
Yeah, they've pumped them out.
Yeah. Let's see. And it goes back, like if you go to, the London Theatre Orchestra and Cast, they have albums that date back to 92. Their first one was Phantom of the Opera.
Right.
And then there's probably 50 plus albums that they've recorded.
Jeez, okay.
Now, the last one it says was 2019. So I'm not really sure what has
transpired.
Right. But to just be so prolific with releases, I mean,
Yeah.
that's that in itself is
The
wild.
the weird thing that I kept coming across, again, only listening to the first half of this, there does seem to be this weird, like almost like fight that's happening with like, it seems like there's competent musicians here. I
Mhm.
even go so far as to say some good musicianship going on. And then the performers, like the singers, range from like, okay, you're like semi-professional to like, oh, that is an amateur performer happening right there. Or it's like,
Again,
I don't know if you were ready to come in and do a recording of this score.
and what I think part of that is I'm wondering if it's just the timelines that are here's our restriction, here's our, we've got to do this. You take this book and go learn it. But you mentioned the musicians and stuff, and see, I thought for a lot of it that this was all not live musicians, or at least supplemented with.
Well, actually, sorry, you might be right, because I think there definitely is some sort of synthesizer stuff going on for some of these for some of these tracks.
But yeah, like if you like, I just looked up. So their title is London Theatre Orchestra and Cast, whereas London Musical Theatre is a different.
Oh, okay, I may have been looking at the wrong group here.
Like you won't find like they don't have websites, they don't have social media, like they don't. So it's
Could
hard
this
to find.
be just AI? Could it be that this is just AI making a musical theater album?
If so, we're in trouble because it started in '92 and the world is going to be a different place than we have
Mhm.
recognized it to be. But yeah, I mean, yeah, as far as some of the singers, like there's some people that like I think on this cast, if I remember right, I love like Little Red's sound.
That doesn't mean like the first. You had messaged me beforehand about this album
Uh,
and mentions like woof about some of this some of these songs. I was like, and I started. I'm like, I guess so. Like nothing was like giving me alarm bells for the first like two or three. Well, actually, really, it's just for the first two, because the wolf comes in and Hello Little Girl. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. And then
uh-huh.
Giants in the Sky. I'm like, ooh, I really don't know about
Really don't
that.
know about that. And I will say they are unafraid to use pitch correction at times better than others.
Yeah.
It gave a lot of if I don't know if you're familiar with the Kids Bop Enterprise, but how some of the,
Sure.
it's kids and you got to really yank those pitches back around, and seemed like we were
Mhm.
doing some lassoing with this.
The musical theater version of that is called Kid Shapoopy, is actually what they
It's
call that.
shapoopy.
So,
I think Baker's Wife, I kind of enjoyed on this.
mhm.
Some of I Love a Little Red, that's just going to be that nasally, bright, forward sound, and she was that. Also, she was a bunch of wrong pitches that were
Right, right.
they're set, like
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, this I mean this was a fever dream of an album for me that
I recommend everyone going and taking a look at this at least once.
yeah.
Give them those, fractions of a penny for your listen on Spotify.
And they have almost 100,000 monthly listeners.
Yeah.
I mean, and
So that's like $5 that they're
yeah,
getting every month.
you've got a wide range of albums to listen to from them too.
Mhm.
I've had friends that have listened to the Lion King album
Oh boy.
and have heard that sometimes the original language or text is ignored for whatever sounds they would like to employ instead.
So they're like more like of an improv group. Is really
Yeah,
what we're
I
saying.
think in improv, that's what it is. They sit down, and they go, "Hey, this is what we're recording today."
Mhm. All right. Any one of the tracks that you would put on, or are we gonna skip over this one to include on our playlist?
I did block a lot of it out, but I mean, I hate to say this, I need to go listen to it again to give
Sure. Okay.
a clear answer on that. But none that are popping out right now. But because it was more of just I listened to it all while I was on a plane, and so I was already in
Yeah.
an
A
otherworldly
fugue state at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I was like, well, here I am stuck on this plane with this album.
Hello, little girl, what's your rush? You're missing all the flowers. The sun won't set for hours. Take your time. But slow, little girl, hard.
I awarded no points, so I'm just putting that out there.
That is fine. I admire, like I said, their just the pure churning out of things that has been done. I mean,
Yeah.
Can you think of
They're
another
going for it. I mean, they're
another company that has 50 something albums of full musicals recorded?
well. That brings us to our last recording here. This is the second Broadway revival from 2022. Yeah, what do you want to say about this?
I love it's nice that I feel like this is one of the first revivals in a while that they, instead of like we said, like for Chicago or something, that it was packed in almost every position.
Yeah.
Every actor, that was selected was all a powerhouse in their own right. And so it's like, oh, I know this person and this person and this person and this person. And sometimes I think that's to its detriment, because they're all talented,
Are you
accomplished
going to
musicians.
mention any names here? Is there a specific role that you're thinking of?
I think, well, okay, you said something first earlier, so I'll say
Yeah.
something first, right? One of my favorite musicians, artist, musical writer herself.
Hmm.
I think Sarah sticks out on this recording in a bad way.
Okay.
I just think that, to me it sounds like she released a Waitress album that was, I forget exactly what it was called, but it was just sung by her,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
like behind the kitchen or whatever it was called. And it seemed like her numbers were like from that album, where it was
Yeah.
taking it from a show, but I'm performing it on my own.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And if it was just me listening to Sarah sing the tracks from Into the Woods, I think it's really great. But I just don't think it really fits well. But I think that about a lot of them on this album, that if it's maybe a song by themselves, I can kind of, but like the Princes are really imbalanced. Like listening to Agony, it's just too, like, it's too opposed. Not that they need to be the same person, but it was hard for me not to hear Gavin Creel as, this young man, and then Joshua Henry as this adult male, but they're supposed to be in like the same situation.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I don't think it's an improper criticism here to mention that I think this production absolutely, and it's more so because of how it started as an Encore's production, which was only
Sure.
supposed to be for like whatever that couple weeks that
Uh-huh.
Encore's usually goes for, and it gets transferred to Broadway. There was definitely a decision to go for like, let's get every big name we can.
Mhm.
And not like, do these big names actually fit together? Is this
Right.
like, does this feel natural? Do their voices complement each other? Do we, instead of doing what they did, which is like, we're just going to put the names and stuff in there? So I get that. I actually agree with that generally. Although, for whatever reason, not that it's as full of an orchestra as what the original Broadway cast is, I do find myself coming back to this album quite a bit to go through for whatever reason. I think you're right, though, is that for the original Broadway cast, I prefer to listen. I shouldn't say prefer. I enjoy greatly listening to that from start to finish. Whereas
Okay.
this one, I usually jump in and listen to one or two songs and then
Sure.
jump
Like-
out of it. Like I'm putting the individual songs and listening to them, not the full album.
Okay. Like Philippa Sue on this album,
Mhm.
I think incredible. I listened to her sing the phone book.
Yeah. I'm a big Brian Darcy James fan as well, so
Oh, okay.
actually I really like his Baker.
Oh, and yes, I didn't comment anything about the Baker. I'll just
Yeah.
have that out there. I might get publicly slandered for Sarah, but
Right.
um,
That was a big piece of conversation at the time. Her Moments in the Woods, she does the option up at the very end, but just a different way to perform the song.
well, and hold on, because I think that was one thing that I thought about here. So technically, in the score here, the opt up. So you're meaning specifically at the end, and it's time to leave the woods, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That is what is the preferred note in this
Yeah.
score, right? Versus there is the optional lower octave. I know Joanna did the lower one, and I love that.
It's we'll have a diva off with them and see.
Yeah, right. But yeah, and it's so hard for me to say, especially me as myself, to critique a cast or an album like this.
Yeah.
Obviously, all powerhouses, all incredible. It just felt like they were thrown together into the same place rather than working through it together. Like, it felt like when they do the what is it? The Broadway Cares, when they do a lot of like gender bent stuff. And
Yeah. Gosh, why am I blanking on what that is called? Anyways, yes, I know what you're talking about.
it seemed like that, where it was like, oh my goodness, we know these really famous people and they've come together to sing this right now rather than, and I think part of that too was going back to what we talked about at the very beginning, the recording process and the recording style. It sounds so much more modern and pop that
Yes, that's right.
it's hard to think of it as an ensemble.
Yeah, people are stepping forward and singing their songs and then stepping back, sort of thing. Yeah,
It sounds like a concert version. But positive things, I have positive things to say
what are
about
your
it
positive
too.
things?
I loved the wolf because like that he was this gentle kind of. I said what I wrote was that it was very scary, tenor, like Earl King. You leave us, like it was very, oh yes, I'm gonna come take you, and that's more frightening to me than a dark and heavy sort of.
Sure, a chain smoking wolf.
Yeah, chain smoking. I love, and I don't remember her name. I love this witch though.
This is Patina Miller, I believe.
I think so. I think that's
Yeah, she's great.
And I thought Stay With Me, I thought incredible. Like it's so tender. It's I really loved that. And I said the same thing about The Witch's Lament. I said that her pain can be felt. And then again on Last Midnight, I wrote like the power that was in this. Like, I mean, to me, she is the standout cast member.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, she was nominated for a Tony Award for this performance. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. So yes.
It was like, oh, she's gonna sing. I'm gonna sit and listen. I'm sat.
I'm ready. Let's go.
I'm ready. I did appreciate any recording that I listened to, and I haven't mentioned it on these other ones, but in No More, I'm a stickler for that, like father, like son being correct. And in like even in the original Broadway one, it isn't.
When you say correct, you mean like the note is correct?
Yeah, like the typically productions are not singing the notes that are written. I really enjoyed that they did that here. Because like the first time, I'm a big nerd, so this is not the first time I've had this book. I've just had stolen PDFs off of somewhere. But the first time I remember, like in high school, looking at what the actual notes were for like father for the baker is different than what's typically on recordings. And so that's been a sticking point for me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Or
yeah, no, I get you.
Yeah.
I get you. That's why No More is the song I'm taking from this production. That's the one I would put on the mixtape.
All the wolves, all the lies, the false hopes, the goodbyes, the reverses. All the wondering what even worse is still in store. All the children, all the giants. No more.
The good thing that we can expect is that there will probably be 4 more Into the Woods recordings in the next decade. So
easily. And some of them I can guarantee will be from the London Theatre cast and orchestra because they've done some of the same show more than once.
Yeah, right. Okay, so, I look forward to that. And I look forward to the kids' version that will be recorded for it. So, well, thank you so much for being here today. There is one last question because I've been asking this question to every single person this season. But because this show deals with fairy tales, what is your favorite fairy tale?
I still think Cinderella is probably my favorite fairy tale. Yeah, I mean, it's the original Rags to Riches story.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, the implication in Into the Woods makes it not my favorite story, but if we're viewing it as a whole, like life is unfair, it can get better. You can do something then, especially when referencing like the original fairy tale, not like the Disney.
Right.
It doesn't need to be a fairy godmother. It's it's just your dead mom, and the fact that it leans a little bit into trauma a bit more.
Yeah, the undercurrent of that story is like trauma that you have to suffer through to get on the other side.
And you get out on the other side. And I know, that's easy to say about most fairy tales. But usually in most stories, the trauma happens in the tale.
Yeah, it's not the lead up to.
And I like that Cinderella already came in damaged. Like that, because to me, that makes her a more realistic character in the pantheon of tales, because so many other fairy tales start with, this person was created right now in this moment, and that's kind of their starting point. But
Yeah.
we, just because of the nature of Cinderella, we know a bit more of her backstory leading into it, and she's a real person.
I love it. Chris, if people wanted to stay in contact with you and see what you're up to, is there a way to do so online?
Yes. So, like I had said earlier, with a name like mine, it's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
But most all of my social media is not Chris Brown. Like most of my handles are not _Chris Brown, which at times has proven to be a difficult thing having an underscore in. But yeah, I'm not super exciting online, but
Okay. Is there, I know you just said you just finished kind of your run Into the Woods. Are there any other shows in your area that people can check out, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, so the theater that I'm doing, it's community theater. During our second week of the show was when they held auditions for the next show. They're doing Rent next.
Okay.
And then right after that, they're doing Kinky Boots. The theater that we use just a couple years ago was purchased by the city because it's a
Historical building, or?
it's a historical building. It's the old Victory Theater that's been around in Rogers, where I live, since the early 1900s, and has had, like, you name it, people come through. You used to come through back in the day. It was left alone for a while. This theater company bought it years ago, converted it to where the balcony was still the balcony, but the understory was cabaret tables.
Right.
And then starting last summer, the theater closed. The city had bought it a few years before, and our city and the Walton Foundation, I'm in Walmart land, like I'm in Walmart World headquarters.
Yeah.
Pumped, I think, $3 to $4 million into the theater to renovate and restore and take out the cabaret tables, but put in full theater seats again. So the capacity went from 230, 240 something to now closer to 500.
Wow. Okay. That's great.
And so it's an abbreviated season. So that's why they said, we're only doing musicals this season, and they're back to back. We're the first show that was back in to reopen the theater.
Oh, that's cool.
That was kind of fun. So yeah, Into the Woods just finished. Rent is next. Kinky Boots is in the fall. Then next season, Assassins is one of the one that's on the list.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you can push some buttons.
Yeah, I want to, that's one that I definitely will be going out for, because no one does Assassins, you know?
No, I know.
Yeah, about a decade ago, the university here did a production of Assassins, and phenomenal. There's a new theater director at the show, and he's incredible. His name is Jason Burrow, and he just got back from doing the national tour with Hamilton as the music director. So he's back at the university again. So when they did Assassins like a decade ago when he started, that was the first time I was able to see it, because there's no recordings really available of it. There's, no one that does it. So when our community theater also announced that they were doing it next season, I was like, really? Around here? I mean, okay.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the South, and right next to the theater is, are you familiar with Daisy BB guns?
No, I guess
Have
no.
you seen a Christmas Story?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
He has a Daisy gun.
Gotcha, yeah.
Like that factory is here in town, and so our theater is right next to the Daisy Museum. And so it's like, well, I mean, I guess you got guns next door. You can have guns in the theater too. But,
why not?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyle. I really enjoyed this, and thank you for accepting a message from a stranger online that just wanted to sit and talk about Sondheim with you.
That has become my life. Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter or Instagram. This is an independent production, and you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere else you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about the film of Into the Woods. Oscar-nominated film, Into the Woods. As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.